I'm here this afternoon at St. James's as part of our conversation series about the South Door and the organ with someone who has been a Royal Academician for many years and who has a long and important connection with St. James's and indeed with Christopher Wren. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, my name's John Maine, and my connection with Wren, if you like, is that I happen to live in Wiltshire where he was born. So every day I can just walk down from my studio, and there is the church where his father was the rector, and there's a great sense of Wren still being around in the village. But of course this is Wren as architect. His father was an architect and he left some remarkable things in the church there. But his son really had a lifetime of learning with his father. And I think you see that in his work. It was a very slow apprenticeship. And by the time, of course, he lived a long life. And so he ended up very qualified in the practicalities of building, the sense of geometry and astronomy, of course. And aesthetics came after that, perhaps. We could talk about that.
Yeah. And in terms of your work, your life and your vocation, how did that begin? And what kind of work are you doing now? What sort of art did you get started with, and where are you with it now?
Well, I keep going round in circles, but I come from the West Country. I was born in Bristol, and Bristol is a city, of course, but it's right in the middle of extraordinary landscapes. Gloucestershire, Somerset, Cornwall, but particularly Wiltshire, which is where I now am. And I've always been interested in man's invasion or habitation of the land. Women too, of course, I must say, to be very correct in this situation.
Quite right. Every gender is in habitation of the land. Yes.
People. I went to the art college and started carving there. And then I went to the Royal College later, following on directly from it, but I was a student for a very long time. And through the studentships, particularly when I was at the Royal College down in South Kensington, I had a great sense of loss of the landscape around the West Country, really, Cornwall particularly, that then. And so I was really making land sculpture rather than three-dimensional sculpture. I was making mud baths that became waves, and very impractical, but I had to struggle through. And then I kept on being involved with art schools and students and fellowships, and so there was always in a community. But I withdrew from the community most of the time and went off and did my own thing. And rather than getting a gallery, I was interested in making art in places. Always been very interested in how places are changed, often by detail.
So placemaking and the experience of deep time and the land and community life, that makes me think about sacred space, about churches, cathedrals, and even abbeys, and connects it to your experience of parish life and of the Wren family in Wiltshire. And when you arrived here this afternoon, you'd just come from Westminster Abbey, so you spent some of your time today in a grand medieval building with this illustrious history that's on this massive scale. And then we've spent some time here in this 17th century, and then following the bombing, 1940s and 50s reimagining of Wren's 17th century space. It's a completely different way of thinking about sacred space, of geometry, of the way that people come together, and the way that heaven and earth get all tangled up in one another. So having come down the road from Westminster Abbey and then returning to this church that you know so well, in a little bit at least of March sunshine, what was your impression and your experience of returning to St. James's today? How was it for you today?
Well, I came in and found it to be very simple after the Abbey, but also I was very struck because I suppose I was thinking about your new door, but I was struck how the axis of a church is very often west to east, of course, and the progression liturgically is from west to east very often. But actually, in the future, you will have a sort of south to north entrance. And that seemed to fit in quite well with the fact that Wren was actually interested in geometry and astronomy. And in astronomy, you don't have, of course, you have a pole star, things moving around it and so on. But that omnidirectional sense makes St James's into an amazing empty space, which actually is not empty. And so why isn't it empty? Because by all the rules of it's got a few twiddly bits, as we know.
It has some decoration too.
That grinning Gibbons fella, but it could be very plain. I have seen sort of versions of this church in New England, which are often sort of plainer actually. And as we all know, to make simple things just right is incredibly difficult. And I think Wren, as I was saying earlier, through having a very long apprenticeship and a long sense of just what mathematics, just what aesthetics, just what proportion meant and orientation, he could handle all those things and create a space which, well, I won't use words for it because I don't know what the words are, but it's a space which is special.
When we get to the edges of language, that's sometimes where art begins, or where an immersive experience becomes ineffable or numinous, and there's an irony in trying to grasp at words to try to get us into that quality of transcendence or the immersive. I think Wren understood that really deeply, and his architecture was constantly, especially in sacred settings, so maybe libraries and civic spaces too, working on the learning edge of those things, inviting people into something which was greater than themselves. And here at St. James's, we talk a lot about imagination, and sometimes the relationship between imagination and justice leads us into really deep conversations about the core purpose of this space as a sacred space in the heart of London, and the relationship between beauty and dignity. And often in these conversations, I've asked people about what they think about this idea, the connection between beauty and dignity. What do you think?
Well, I see it as more, without diverting from your question, but I see it much more as being not a linear hierarchy. And justice is often to do with aspects of hierarchies, in fact. But in this church, you do have a sort of omnidirectional feel. I mean, it's not like the Roman Catholic Church in Liverpool, which is all the way round, but Wren did some round ones, as we know. Yeah. And interestingly, the city church with the Henry Moore altar in it,
St. Stephen's Walbrook.
St. Stephen's Walbrook, I feel is completely cancelled out by having Moore's lump of stone in the middle of it, because I think the lesson was that Wren very carefully created that space to be tense, meaningful, energised, and of course the first thing people think is, oh lovely, I can put something in it. But
this wide gap is an invitation for new work. It's an interesting way of thinking about it, right?
So I think you're absolutely on a winning direction to start off with the great sense of space in the church and what holds that space, what makes it. And I think just as with, on a journey, it's the punctuation that makes the spaces. It's small moments of turning can activate great areas of tension and meaning.
Small moments of turning is such a beautiful phrase. And for the South Door project in particular, it's reopening a space that was open between the church and Jermyn Street and then St. James's Square beyond. And that door was bricked up in the 19th century. 19th century folks had different ways of thinking about
Yes.
spaces and churches, and it was also quite practical. It was about getting more people in the building, which is a different time and a different way of thinking about theology and Anglicanism as well. And so bringing this door back creates a different kind of invitation, a different sort of turning, where currently the south side of the church, as it has been with that wall running all the way along, even though there's a little angel, there's a beautiful little face up in the top of the keystone at the top of the central window. So there's still this echo, right?
Yes.
And so we're bringing that back into this south door. It will be accessible, so it will be possible to come up a path if anyone is in need because of mobility challenges, wheelchair users. That's absolutely brilliant. So there's a radical way of thinking about hospitality reinvigorated with this. I wonder what you think about imagining yourself in St. James's Square. Say you've just walked up from Trafalgar Square, or you've been looking in an art gallery or something like that. As you have, perfect, exactly that. And you come through St. James's Square, and then you come towards that central north-south axis, and you see this door open. What do you think of what that might do, how that might feel, the way that might transform yours and others' relationship to this little local streetscape, this bite-sized little area of central London?
Well, of course, when you come up, you see the wall of the church and a door. So you don't immediately think, oh, this is a side door. You think, this is the door. But the odd thing about when you get into the church is that usually south and north doors, more particularly south doors, often approaches. They either go in through their own porch, if they're small, or else they're more ceremonial and go into a transept, which is a very strong component of a cruciform direction of a church. Now, this church is not really cruciform, it's a box.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's got two layers, and we sort of emphasise that, the upper and the lower part. So your feeling coming in, well, I think just today, my immediate feeling was how strange that this isn't for me. These seats are all pointing down there. Why am I coming in here?
We're going to have to think quite carefully about the way that the sacred space overall responds to Wren's original design, and also responds to Albert Richardson and what happened in the mid-20th century with his, sometimes what I think of as neo-classicism,
Right.
and the work that he did in a number of churches that were horrifically damaged in the war, where he was rethinking classical spaces. And love it or hate it, with these pews that he designed and those strange octagonal lamps, the inheritance of what we have now, those built-up layers of St. James's, are weaving their way through these different layers of history, and also weaving their way into an individual or a group's journey through the church in ways that can, I guess, activate different experiences of time and space. It's like today, here, this place, this time, and also a kind of deeper time that we share in our bodies, each of us, where we're kind of turning and moving through spaces in ways where we know instinctively this is a space of invitation and it feels good just to be here. It feels good in body, mind, and spirit just to be here. Or this is a space that feels a bit awkward, a bit strange. I wasn't expecting this.
I don't know whether you want it to be awkward, but I
don't think we do.
I would have thought not. And the conventional way to deal with that would be to simply make an aisle that runs north to south, which can cross with the main aisle you have, which runs east to west. So you don't have chairs blocking you as you come in. You'd have to deal with that, but that would be it might be a way to do it, because then you're actually re-establishing the cruciform underlying message, if there is to be one.
Yes.
Within the rather I can't think of the right word for it, but I think it's a classical notion that you have a temple which is a box.
Yeah.
And it's got columns all the way around it, and maybe it has an altar somewhere, but usually an altar at one end, but not always. But so you are, and in Wren's time, he was very learned in the classics. It was the Renaissance had happened, and he had all that learning, and his models were all from the classical world. So he wasn't really, you know, even at St Paul's, he didn't have a great spire pointing up to the the heavens. He had this dome which contained you back to earth, although people see it as a great lofty thing. But as a form, it is a containing shape, whereas a spire is a directional aspiration.
So we'll be really interested as not only Ptolemy as architect and others who are working on the project overall, but from a clergy and a congregation point of view, I think there will be a real period of experimentation, of getting used to a new way of thinking about the church's permeable points, if I can put it that way.
Yeah,
we'll see. And today, you are one of the very first people on earth ever to have walked through the freshly completed south door. The project isn't finished, but the Portland stone of the door itself is in place within the last few hours.
What have you done to me?
What have you done? Yes, exactly. Well, I came in after you, so I guess whatever's happened has happened to us both. But there was something so exciting about being there and seeing the detail and speaking to Fullers, speaking to Mark and to Stephen about their work. As a sculptor and as someone who's so steeped in Wren spaces and Wren's life, what was it like for you to be out there just now and to have that moment with these fresh stones and with this old vision?
Well, it had two chapters. The first was when I did in fact walk up from St James. I knew that there was going to be this door. I was anticipating having this emblem in front of me, and what I saw was scaffolding.
Yes, it's not done.
So I thought, well, what's going on? I thought it was ready, and so I thought, well, never mind, it will be. And I came in the usual way around the side, and then I came into the church to see what it looked like from the inside. To my surprise, there was a box on it inside the church.
Yeah.
That was very unexpected. So I went and had a look at the box. I went and stood about at the point where I would be when I came in to see what the effect of it might be. But I couldn't quite put it together. But coming in the real way, coming in from the outside, coming through the newly finished gap with a very proud workmen standing there, they were obviously pleased as punch with what they'd done.
They're delighted. Yeah.
And there's a great privilege of being able to walk through it. It was like a dream becoming a reality, which sounds like a cliche, but it was like a sort of, I was imagining it and then I was actually doing it.
Yes, and the joy that I felt, the genuine pleasure that I felt of the four of us standing there, and I go in, hopefully I get the balance, maybe I don't, between wanting to spend time with people there, saying hello to them and checking it out and saying hi and just being a friendly face in community, and also encouraging visitors like you today to spend time with the project at whatever moment in the timeline and in the building project we're in. I didn't know that this is the moment, this is the day. And so the shared delight of seeing it, and exactly as you say, noticing for me the energy of a job well done.
Yes.
At this stage. This is a milestone today.
Definitely.
And so that we were both present for that is, to me, that's holy ground. That's a wonderful thing that we get to share in together as sculptor and bricklayers and builders and priests, for what it's worth. I wonder, by way of conclusion, whether or not there's anything you want to share in relation to your life in and around Piccadilly, your experience as an artist, and your feelings about St. James's, whatever you like.
Well, this is certainly added an enormous amount to the visits that I will pay here, because I always do come and have a look when I'm here. I go to the Academy. If it gets a bit much, it's a good idea to come down here and just see what's going on.
Yeah.
Especially if there's nothing going on, which I quite like. But now you're right. It's more muscular now. You've got that other entrance. It's not quite as safe as you come in the West End, and move towards the east. You know you're on that journey, and nothing's going to come in at a tangent. There will be no lateral encountering. which sounds a little bit nervy, but it just as a space, it makes people slightly more vulnerable. But I think that's a very good thing. But one of the things about St James's is that you always notice people coming here for sanctity, as a sanctuary, and or for a snooze, but whichever the two, whichever they are. Yes. Whether they feel just the same if there's an open door, I don't know. And whether one of the reasons for closing up the door might have been to contain what was in the church, which you've now released. So you've got a big responsibility, and I think it's a good thing. And you can always refer to Sir Christopher, say, well, it's what he wanted. And I think there's a lot in that, an enormous amount in it. And I think the geometric, astronomical aspects of having a space that has more than one axis is very significant.
I think it connects us to a greater cosmology as well as a holy centuries-old vision. And I'm so glad we had this conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here.